Thank you, Bishop Sloan. Bishop Sloan entertained me at dinner last night with a few people, and we had great fun. I put it on Facebook, so if you sometime today friend me, Mary Foster Parmer, P-A-R-M-E-R, you'll see some pictures of some of your compadres besides Bishop Sloan. So thank you for having me here, and I appreciate Sarah Partain for originally inviting me. I believe that Donna Gerald is a friend of mine. She's one of your senior seminarians at the Seminary of the Southwest, where I have an office. And Donna told Sarah last year about this work that I'm doing for the Diocese of Texas, and so I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate Georgianne Perrine for being my wonderful host yesterday, picking me up at the airport and getting me all settled in. Generally, I begin any sort of consulting work I do, or vestry retreats, or when I do the training with this newcomer work, and I have smaller groups, I have everybody go around and say where you grew up, what part of the world you grew up in, if you grew up Episcopalian or not, if not, which tradition, and then when you came into the Episcopal Church. But with a group this size, I don't have time to do that. And then after I finish with everyone kind of introducing themselves that way, I tell my story, which is, as Bishop Sloan said, I grew up in Natchez, Mississippi. I was a middle child of 5 children. My parents were Southern Baptist. I tell people my father was a deacon, my mother was a Sunday school teacher, and we had a drug problem in our family. We were drugged to church. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and our home was the home that all the visiting missionaries and preachers stayed in our home. So I grew up with this sense of real hospitality. I got married, moved away from Mississippi, started having children, and then fast forward, 20 years later, I'm living in Beaumont, Texas. I'm divorced, single parent. I have a 16-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter, and I had opened a business recruiting physicians to Beaumont. So one morning, I'm sitting at my desk at my office in downtown Beaumont, and I get a phone call. Now, I was active in the Baptist church there, in Beaumont. I get this phone call, and a woman by the name of Sally Dooley calls me, and she and I sit on the Symphony League board together. And the only thing she said to me that morning was, "Mary, I'd love it if you'd go to church with me sometime." And I said, "Where do you go to church?" And she said, "The Downtown Episcopal Church, St. Mark's." And so I said, I'd like to do that. And so it was one Sunday morning, shortly thereafter, I went to St. Mark's Episcopal Church with Sally, my very first visit to a liturgical church. And as many of you can attest who come from other traditions, I was pretty much overwhelmed. In that moment, I fell in love with what I now know was the liturgy, the reverence, just the ability to kneel when I prayed. So through the many months that followed, I really struggled with what I know now was a call from God. I had a deep, intuitive sense that God was calling me into ministry in a church setting, but fear on many levels prevented me from taking any action. So a little over a year went by, and one late summer afternoon, I was at a Young Life meeting, and I was on that committee, and our Young Life leader said, "Didn't you go to an Episcopal church a while back?" And I said, "Yeah, about a year ago." And he said, "Well, I attend a little small Episcopal church across town, and I'd love it if you'd go with me. We have a new rector." I had to ask him what that was. He said, "I think you'll like him because he's from Alabama." So on August 16th, 1996, I walk up to St. Stephen's Church, a little small. There had been a split. There were maybe 80 people there that Sunday. And the new rector had only been there 2 weeks. His name is Patrick Gahan. And when Patrick found out that I'm originally from Natchez, Mississippi, the first thing he said to me was, "I bet they call you Mary there." And I said, "Mary Elizabeth." So I was welcomed by someone whose greatest gifts were transforming hospitality and empowering the laity for ministry. Long story short, I wound up closing my business and becoming director of adult ministries and evangelism there for 10 years. Today, I'm blessed to be using the gifts that God gave me to do amazing life-giving work, not only the newcomer work that I'm going to talk to you about today, but quite gracefully, my story has come full circle. The reason that Sally Dooley picked up the phone and called me back that summer of 1995, Bishop Claude Payne was casting his vision for the Diocese of Texas to move from maintenance to mission. And he had told everyone that summer to go home at a meeting, a big gathering in Houston, a couple of thousand people there. And he had told everyone to go home and invite someone to church. And Miss Dooley, an introvert, was just doing what her bishop told her to do. And she picked up the phone and called me. So I'm blessed. I'm blessed now to be working for the very bishop who challenged his people in his diocese to just invite someone to church. And I'm working for the gathering of leaders. In 2009, I had moved to Austin to go back to school. I went to St. Edward's and got a degree in religious studies. And I was graduating that spring, and that's when Bishop Payne offered me this job. At the same time, we had a new bishop, Bishop Andy Doyle, for the Diocese of Texas. And he and Mary McGregor, who I think came here a couple of years ago as your keynote. Mary is a director of congregational development and evangelism. They had a conversation around what can we do with our churches to work on being more welcoming and evangelism and the things that we need to do in our church. And Mary McGregor turned to Bishop Doyle and she said, you need to hire Mary Parmer. So they asked me if they would give me 4 churches to work with and asked me to create something to help our churches around welcoming and evangelism. So I began that project in 2010 with these 4 congregations. I created assessment tools and materials, concrete resources to help these 4 churches. And then as I began creating the tools, I started looking everywhere. There was nothing Episcopalian that was what I was looking for. And so I just kind of started creating this from scratch. Well, in the last 2 years, I've done trainings around the Diocese of Texas. We've now had over 70 congregations send over 250 clergy and lay to the trainings. I've done numerous clergy conference workshops, diocesan workshops. Some of the statistics are just amazing. One of the smaller churches in our diocese, Calvary Richmond, had a new rector a year ago. He asked me to come and really do some intense work with the leadership. So that little church last year grew by 60 members. And the rector said this about this work. He said, Mary, the exercises we did that you've created with these newcomer assessments brought new energy and spirit into the congregation because the congregation bought into what was needed to change the culture in that church. One of my pilot churches, St. Francis, they grew by 142 members last year. One of the big reasons is that when I started working with them, right beside that church is the largest Episcopal day school in the nation. They have 853 students. The former rector never stepped foot in the church and the school. He just wasn't involved with the school. And so when I started working with them, I said to the vestry and the clergy, that's your biggest mission field. And the first 6 months of doing this work, they moved from 10% of those school children as members to 20%, and it's grown even more. So the primary objective, as I said, was to create a product, something that was tangible, with resources, something creative. So what I would say to you today, as what I have said to all the congregations that are using this material, it's not rocket science. And you're going to see today, I'm going to pass all this out today. You're going to see that it's just practical stuff. But as one of our young clergy said, Mary, this is work. It's work only because you have to be intentional. But what I tell the churches is, imagine the limitless possibilities that each of your congregations have, no matter what size. Because the material that I've created it encompasses, it's real comprehensive, and you can use it for churches that are less than 50, average Sunday attendance, all the way up to St. Martin's, which is our largest Episcopal church in the Episcopal Church in Houston. And I say to think outside the box, to risk failure for the sake of implementing something new. So those are critical things that I tell the churches. The first thing I did, because I've done a lot of work in consulting work in our diocese, I really prayed about it, and I said, we need a vision statement for this material. And so the vision statement is cultivating new practices of invitation, welcome, and connection that are rooted and grounded in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Will transform our congregations and help shape an authentic culture of effective newcomer ministry. The next thing I did was, for those of you in this room who've done that work with your congregations of mission and vision, is to determine what the core values are. So the core values, I couldn't stand it last night because they were making me laugh so much. I said, well, they made me laugh so much, that I was just going to put them up there. So the core values, the very first one is prayerful. It just makes sense, right? We pray that God gives us the hearts to reflect God's gracious invitation and welcome. Because it's not our table to which we're welcoming people, it's God's table. And I have to tell you that sometime today I'll have to play you all my theme song. You're going to love it. You're just going to love it. I found this song. It's called The Welcome Table by the Blind Boys of Alabama. It's a great song. So I'll have to play that for you later on today. The second one is to be intentional. We must intentionally nurture a commitment to effective newcomer ministry. We need to think and organize systematically. It's just really important that we think outside the box, that we're, use our imagination and creativity to be intentionally focused on newcomer ministry. The third one is relational, and this one really runs through the whole material. It's critical. The way we empower people for ministry and close the back door is to be in relationship with them. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has a great quote that speaks to this. He says, "We say in our African idiom, a person is a person through other persons. The solitary human being is a contradiction in terms. I need you in order to be me, as you need me in order to be you. We're caught up in a delicate network of interconnectedness. I have gifts that you don't, and you have gifts that I don't. So we are made differently so that we may know our need of each other." And the last one, I have to tell you, Bishop Payne gave me the last one, to be accountable. He was looking at this material about 1.5 years ago, and Bishop Payne, as Bishop Sloan said, is retired. He turned 80 this past year. He is the most active 80-year-old I know. And he's looking at the material, and he calls me, and he says, "Mary, you're holding these churches accountable." He's talking about those pilot churches. And I said, "Yes, I am. But they're accountable to the diocese, really." But I went, bingo, Bishop Payne, you've given me my fourth core value. We're accountable. We're accountable to God. We're accountable to the gospel and to each other. So then what I started looking at was the challenge. As I was working with these churches and then doing these trainings and continuing to add to the churches over the last couple of years that we're going to try using this material, I ran into 4 challenges that are really important for you to hear today. The first one is complacency. I believe that complacency around newcomer ministry is our prevailing sin. It's our prevailing sin. We think of ourselves as a friendly community when in reality all we are is a community of friends. We think of ourselves as a friendly community when in reality all we are is a community of friends. And if you don't believe it, look where your people go at coffee hour. They go straight to their friends. They don't go to the stranger in the room. The second one is action. At the end of the day, our actions speak louder than our words. It's not what we teach, preach, or say, it's what we do. At the end of the day, did we see Christ in the newcomers who walked in our doors? But more importantly, did they see Christ in us? The third one is assumptions. This is really important. Getting past people's fears and assumptions. So I had lunch about 1.5 years ago with a rector at a large church in Austin, and we were talking about different things. It was obvious that he had not looked at the material. And by the end of the lunch, he said, "Mary, this newcomer stuff that you're working on, rectors at churches our size don't want a program peddled to them." Well, I had to go get counseling after that. So I call Mayor McGregor, and then I call Bishop Payne. Bishop Payne says, he just doesn't get it. He said, have him read my book, Mary. Bishop Payne has written this great book. I've got a copy of it up here. He says, in the book, he says, evangelism, it's called Reclaiming the Great Commission. And he says, evangelism is not a program. Evangelism is not a program, it's an ethos. Evangelism is not a program, it's the gospel. It's what we're called to do. And then the fourth one is obstacles, and you're going to run into them. You're going to run into them. If you try to do any of the material, any of the stuff that you're going to see, you will have obstacles. You're going to get bogged down by the sacred cows. You all have them. And I'm going to tell you a story of one. So I take this material to a church up in East Texas, beautiful little church, beautiful. And the rector has me there coming on a Friday night because I'm going to do this work with the vestry the next morning. So we're walking around, he's showing me around, and he introduces me to a woman who's kind of, sort of on staff, kind of, sort of, part-time, sort of, has been there like 30 years. And I said, so tell me, how do you get your visitors to go from the nave across this beautiful courtyard over to the parish hall? She said, it's really hard. I said, well, you could have the coffee hour right out here because it's beautiful. And this, big trees all around, gorgeous. She says, oh, no, we can't. We have bees. So I looked at the rector, and he rolled his eyes. And I said, okay. So the next day at the vestry retreat, we finished the vestry retreat, and he says, Mary, would you share with the vestry that story that you heard yesterday about the bees? So I told this vestry. And this man sat there who grew up in the church, grew up there, was baptized there. He says, Mary, I've never seen a bee on this property, ever. That woman had decided that bees were attracted to donuts, obviously, and she was the gatekeeper. So they never had coffee hour out there. One of the women that will remain nameless since this is going to be on tape, at a very, very, very large church in Houston. She grew up in that church. She moves away. She comes back, and they hire her to do this work, Newcomer work. And she said, she comes to my training, and she calls me. She says, Mary, what am I going to do? She said, every single thing I want to do in this church, they say, oh, we did that 10 years ago. Oh, we don't want to do that. That's just not going to work. Oh, we're going to, so you're going to, as I said, you're going to get bobbed, but what I say about this is think about the obstacles in your own setting ahead of time, and then don't get bogged down by them. Okay, so they asked me to do this with newcomers. So what do I do? What do I do with this? So what I did was divide it up into what I call 3 essentials: invitation, welcome, connection. Invitation is really just evangelism. It's that E word that Episcopalians find hard to say. It's just evangelism. The second one is welcome. It's just the ministry of hospitality. And then the third one is what I call connection. And the connection is a vital piece. And it's the biggest churches in our diocese are dismal at connection. And you might call it assimilation. I call it closing the back door until at our diocesan council in February, this lady comes and says, you can't use that, close the back door. And I'm thinking, I don't mean lock the back door. I mean, because what has happened is the larger churches in our diocese, as many people go out the back door as come in the front door. That's what I mean by that. This one young clergy in our gathering of leaders came up to me at the very first clergy conference, and I was kind of testing this material at the clergy conference, and he says, Mary, I think we need to leave the back door open for certain people. He had just gotten to this, he had just gotten to this parish, and he was struggling with some, and I said, you have some EGRs in your parish? He said, I don't know what that means. I said, extra grace required. We all have them. So invitation, yeah, you recognize that person? Actually, he is holding his iPhone, and he's got an app on it that because Rich was giving him a hard time about going to Mississippi State, and he said, how do y'all yell at your football games? And Bishop Sloan pulls out his iPhone with his app, and he shakes it, and it's the bulldog bell. And I have to correct you too, Bishop Sloan. I got married after 2 years at Mississippi State. I didn't graduate from there. I'm sorry. I graduated from St. Edward's University in Austin. But that's okay. I went there for 2 years. So evangelism, I use the Great Commission. All of you in here who grew up Southern Baptist, you can quote it. It's about go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Invitation is about, as I said, it's not about inviting people into a relationship just with you and others in your congregation. It's about inviting people into a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Personal invitation is absolutely the most effective thing. So what I do in this material is I give you tools to help your congregation do that invitation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Research says 3 out of 4 people who do not attend church say that they would come if someone bothered to invite them. 3 out of 4 people say they would if someone bothered to invite them. The average Episcopalian invites someone to church once every 37 years. So what we have to do with invitation is create a culture of evangelism. And I have to tell you this, it starts with the leadership. It starts with the bishop. Leadership flows downriver. I have seen it over and over again in our diocese. Bishop Doyle was on it from the beginning, but it has taken 3 years, 4 years for the clergy to get it, one by one, because if the clergy don't get it, then their vestry aren't going to get it. If the vestry doesn't get it, the person in the pew is not going to get it. You know, leadership flows downriver. One of the things that Bishop Doyle says over and over again is that we are vessels of Jesus Christ in the world. C.S. Lewis said we must form people to be little Jesus Christ out in the world. And if we're not about that, then what are we doing? You know, churches are pilgrim way stations along the way. There are a lot of spiritually abused people out there. And the Episcopal Church, I believe, is the best place for them. Have you ever Googled yourself? Yeah, so try it. So a couple of months ago, I Googled Mary Parmer, Newcomer, and up popped an article that had been printed on the Episcopal Church Foundation website way back in March of last year. This article was written by Miguel Escobar. He's the program director for the Episcopal Church Foundation in New York. And he called it Extending the Invitation. And this is what it says. Whenever I hear about how hard it is to evangelize in the Episcopal Church, I immediately think of 5 of my closest friends. These 5 friends are wonderful people. They're thoughtful, socially engaged young adults who balance their commitments to serious issues with a serious sense of fun. And while none of these 5 currently attend a church, I believe all are open to spiritual religious exploration. To my mind, anyway, this makes them prime candidates for the Episcopal Church. Because of this, time and time again, I've tried to work up the nerve to extend an invitation, and on all but one occasion, I failed. My reasons for not extending the invitation are plentiful and familiar. I'm worried about what my friends will think about me. I'm concerned over whether the sermon will be good or whether the music will be well chosen. I wonder how I'd feel at the end of the day if they aren't interested. This short video from the Diocese of Texas, okay, that's where my name came in. Okay, so 3 years ago, that story that I just told you all about becoming an Episcopalian, they videotaped it at one of these with all our clergy, and they put it on the website, and it's still on there from 3 years later. 4 minutes. He says, this short video from the Diocese of Texas helps to correct all that. When I watched it last week, I realized how my reasons for not extending the invitation were largely about control and mainly about me. In contrast, this video shows how the initial invitation was just a spark for a much larger transformation. It shows how one person's journey began when a friend invited them to an Episcopal church, but how God and the Holy Spirit took over from there. Like most people, I need regular reminders that it's not all about me. Evangelism isn't all about inviting people to my church. There's no way to control what people think of me or what will happen during the service or whether they'll even start a new journey. But this video highlights the fact that evangelism isn't so much about offering something that's ours to others, so much as extending the invitation and getting out of the way. Extending the invitation and getting out of the way. To take a look at this video that I found about invitation. You're just going to love it.
I'll be inside in a minute. I want to say hey to Joe. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Mike.
Flower beds are looking good, neighbor.
Yep. You guys just get back from church?
Yeah, just been at the church house.
What if Ryan invites me to church? I mean, I'd go if he asked me to go. This is the way it is. I'm out in my front yard when he comes home from church. It's always so awkward.
It's so awkward, and I'm so hungry. Ugh. I think my wife made goulash. I love goulash. Oh, maybe Joe would like some goulash for lunch. Hey, Joe.
Here comes the invitation to church.
Yeah? You want to come over
Sure,
for
I'd love to go
goulash?
to church with you.
What'd you just say?
What'd you just say? No, what'd you say?
what did you say?
You said something about God. God. Goulash. Goulash?
Goulash. It's a...
You're having goulash at your church?
No, at my house.
You're inviting me over for goulash?
Yeah.
At your goulash? Yeah, who doesn't like goulash? I like some goulash. Yeah, sign me up. Goulash.
I'll check and make sure we have enough.
I see you walking away.
Don't do it like that. So what is the deep truth of invitation? The deep truth of invitation is courage versus fear. Courage versus fear, that we have the courage to do what God is calling us to do. The second essential after invitation is welcome. It's the ministry of hospitality. It's the letter Paul to the Romans says, welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you. You know, Jesus asked us to see each other in a new way, in the way of love and compassion and forgiveness. And he modeled for us how we are to do that. And we're called to see every single person that we meet on a regular basis. Barbara Brown Taylor writes about this in a book called Altars in the World. Altars in the World, she has this whole section on seeing other people, and she talks about living in Georgia and going to the Winn-Dixie and going to the same little girl every time to get her groceries. And she says, you know what? This young woman's got a name tag. She's somebody's mother, somebody's daughter. All I'm called to do is really see her. When she says, you know, you saved, $5.15 at Winn-Dixie today, I need to look back into her eyes and see her for who she is. A friend of mine left the Diocese of Texas a couple of years ago and moved outside Atlanta, and she was very active in the Diocese of Texas, very active. She's professional, early 50s. She goes over there. One night she called me, this is about a year and a half ago, and she says, Mary, I'm so in despair. I have gone to 4 different Episcopal churches. I dress up, I look nice. It's like they don't see me. In one of the churches, I filled out 2 welcome cards, never got anything, and all of a sudden she gets a letter in the mail with a pledge card. Now let me tell you, in the last 2 weekends, 2 weeks ago, I was invited to the Diocese of Pennsylvania by Frank Allen. Frank Allen is the rector at one of the largest churches in Diocese of Pennsylvania in the mainline Philadelphia, St. David's in Wayne. It was built in 1715, and he invited a number of churches from the Diocese of Pennsylvania and Bethlehem. And so I was to do, I did a newcomer training, all-day training on Saturday for those churches. The next morning, I go to the service, the big service, at 9:15. I get there at 9:10. I come to the front doors. I had stood inside the doors. The 4 ushers were all talking to each other. And finally he saw me, and he handed it to me. Good morning, welcome to St. David's. And I kind of walked around the big narthex. No one else spoke to me. And so Frank was watching it from the other side of the room. I told their leadership that afternoon, because I met with just them that afternoon, I said, if I had moved here and I was looking for a church, I probably wouldn't come back. No one was friendly, no one spoke to me. Last weekend, Bishop Payne asked me to come to Abilene. He was baptized at Heavenly Rest in Abilene, Texas, and he and Barbara just moved back there. And he said, I need you to come to our church and do this work. So I wasn't going to be working with their leadership until Sunday afternoon. Sunday morning, I went to the 8 o'clock service. Bishop Payne was there. He said, no, I'm not going to speak to you because I don't want them to just think you're a stranger. I was sat on the back row. I had 8 or 10 people come up to me after that 8 o'clock Rite One service. At the 10:45 service, I got there at 10:40. And I sat down in the back. After the service, that service was packed. One man came up to me, and I deliberately stood there, waiting. No one spoke to me. It's prevalent. It's prevalent in our churches. In my Googling different things for this work, I found this great blog written by Daniel Simon. He's one of the associates up at Trinity Wall Street, and he was doing some trainers with his greeters and ushers. And he says, greeters and ushers are God's stand-ins and ambassadors, because you are standing at the threshold and you're the first person that a person speaks to when they enter. You hold a huge amount of spiritual power. Because you're the first person they meet, people will project onto you all the assumptions and expectations that they've gotten about God before they ever walked in the door, positive or negative. How you respond will either challenge or reinforce those assumptions. Your actions of welcoming them may make all the difference in their experience, not only of your church, but of God. We don't know, and I want you to really hear me, we don't know when someone walks through the doors of our church what's going on in their lives. For that matter, most often, we don't even know what's going on in the lives of the people sitting in the pew next to us, because we haven't taken time to be in relationship with them. I'm going to show you a training video. This particular corporation went through some controversial stuff a couple of years ago, and for us to reproduce it, it was going to cost megabucks. So the controversies died down. The training video is enormously valid and appropriate for this part of the welcome piece. And just remember as you're watching it, think about your own context in your churches and the people that are walking through the doors. life has a story if we bother to read it. 2.5 years ago, on September 11th of 2010, my grandson was born up in southern New Jersey. This is my son and my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter Abby. He was bookended by his parents. Lee was born on September 10th, my son on September 12th. And when he was born in that little tiny town, they realized pretty quickly that he could not suck or swallow. So they life-flighted him over to the DuPont Hospital for Children in Wilmington, Delaware. My daughter-in-law is a chemical engineer for DuPont and works at the corporate office there in Wilmington. And after a few weeks in the PDICU, they determined that he had something called Mobius syndrome. Mobius syndrome is a very rare neurological disorder that affects the 5th and 6th cranial nerves. So he has no facial affect. He was born with some physical deformities, his little small left arm and hand, club feet. They put a feeding tube in and sent him home. And so I was up there taking care of Abby. This is mid-October, right after he was born. And my son said, "Mom, find us a church to go to." My son is a lapsed Episcopalian, Baptist Episcopalian. My daughter-in-law is a lapsed Catholic. So I got on the web, and there was one tiny church in this little tiny town that had a website. So we went there, Presbyterian Church. We go up, it's obvious he's carrying all kinds of stuff. It's obvious this baby has problems. Small town, no one asked them their name, why they were there, any information about them. A week or two later, not too long after that, he was in the neurosurgeon's office back at the hospital, and he stopped breathing. And when he stopped breathing, they put him back in PDICU and determined that he had bronchiomalacia, where his little airways were collapsing, but he had something called central apnea. When he slept, he would stop breathing, so they put him in a trach and on a ventilator. And he stayed on a trach and a ventilator till last summer. There he is on his little trach and ventilator. Sometime last summer, they did a sleep study and determined that central apnea was no more. They took it off. They realized that his cognitive function was fabulous. So this past Christmas, he got to fly for the first time and meet my father, whom he was named after, my 91-year-old father, Ike, in Natchez, Mississippi, and that's baby Ike. And then they just sent me this picture. They just moved to West Virginia, a little tiny town, Parkersburg, and that's him on the right, and this is their baby goats. My family needed community, and they needed faith community. That could happen in any of our churches. We don't know what's going on in the lives of people, but the deep truth of welcome is seeing the other. Our job is to be in relationship with people. If they come in the door of your church on a Sunday, the Holy Spirit brought them there. And our job is to find out why. The last one is connection, and I use the scripture out of Romans. I'm passionate about spiritual gifts. I've done a lot of workshops and training on spiritual gifts. It's because way back when I was Southern Baptist, I took an inventory, and they told me I had the spiritual gift of exhortation, but then they started teaching me. I was teaching 9th grade girls in New Orleans, and I was a miserable failure. And it wasn't until I became Episcopalian, took another one, and found out I don't have the gift of teaching. It's not even on my radar. Exhortation is encouraging people. And when I got that, I went, God gave me a gift I really can use. So I'm passionate about it. And the big piece of connection is that we help people to understand what their gifts are. Every one of you is gifted. Every one of you have different gifts. And our job as a church is to listen to you, to hear your story, to find out why you came to church in the first place, to connect you in ministry, to help you discern your own giftedness. You all have vocations, and to help you discern that giftedness so that you can use those gifts in the body of Christ. And if we don't do that, we fail at this big piece. And so many of our churches in the Diocese of Texas, I have said, find a way to hire somebody, even if it's just part-time. But you've got to have someone on your church staff who is going to be intentional and systematic about taking care of those newcomers when they come in the door and making sure that they're listened to. It's giving meaning to membership. It's empowering the laity for ministry. It's relationship, relationship, relationship. People are asking when they come in, where do I fit in? Can I make friends in this church? Is there room for me relationally? Does this church need me? Can I find a place to belong and serve? Am I safe here? And this goes all the way through to the people that are still sitting in your pews that have been there 5 years. I call them pew potatoes. And they come on Sunday morning, and they never get involved in ministry, and they never get active, and they're just holding their place, I guess, when their daughter gets married or they die. But so connection is really, really important. And the deep truth of connection is what I call the sacred act of listening. Because until we really listen to people and get to know them, we won't do this as we're supposed to be doing it. I have a checklist on church school that I will give out for the ones of you who have schools. Now I want to say this, and when Bishop Doyle asked me to give a report of this at our diocesan council just a short 2 months ago, there were probably, I don't know, we have a big diocese, 153 congregations, and there were probably 1,200 people in the room. And I said this to them, and I'm going to say it to you now. I am convinced that we can change the narrative, the culture in our congregations. But it's going to take courageous clergy who are serious about leading the way, equipping your people in your congregation to be little Jesus Christ in the world. Clergy who are unafraid to empower your laity for ministry. And it's going to take courageous laity who are willing to confront the obstacles that are holding you back from ministry, who are willing to step out of your comfort zone for the sake of the gospel, to invite someone to church, to discern your own giftedness, and then to use those gifts in the body of Christ, to be more relational and more intentional in everything you do. Transformation happens in our lives when we're able to see old things in new ways, full of new possibilities. Jesus calls us to live transformed lives and to see others in a new way, in the way of love. And we're transformed when we can adopt new behaviors and new attitudes. Imagine what our churches would be like if they were filled with people who really had the ability to see others, who stopped looking through the narrow lens of their own world, people who've been transformed by the grace of God. We are called to be fully engaged in living out God's transformative mission of hospitality to the world. And something sacred, y'all, happens when we seek these deep truths. Courage, seeing the other, sacred act of listening. And while the people who are invited and welcomed and connected will benefit, at the end of the day, we are the ones who will be transformed. Thank you.